to make a comment or ask a question yourself. All right, just checking if anyone's saying. People are excited, Francois. François-Marie Patorni, a French American, is an independent scholar specializing in the history of the French-speaking people in New Mexico and the American Southwest. Patorni was born and grew up in Paris. After postgraduate studies in France, he spent 2 years as a volunteer in Chad and some more time in Togo, Benin, and Algeria. Later, he tried the American experience, earning an MBA from the Wharton School in Philadelphia in 1972. On campus, he got involved in the Nixon-McGovern presidential campaign, quite a ride for a Frenchman. He then had a career at the World Bank in Washington, D.C., including multi-years postings in India and Senegal, and frequent travel to Africa, the Middle East, Latin America, and Asia. Hattorni moved to New Mexico in 2004. He realized the extraordinarily rich history of the French Canadians, and other French-speaking people, and embarked on his great chase for the French in New Mexico. He also has been involved, has been an environmental advocate in New Mexico, including being president of the Santa Fe Watershed Association for 7 years. Please welcome François-Marie Patorni as he presents his book, The French in New Mexico, 4 Centuries of Exploration, Adventure, and Influence. Thank you, Francois.
Thank you so much, Jessica. I would like first to say a warm thank to the Santa Fe Public Library for hosting me, and especially to you and to Maria Sanchez. So you have been so helpful. So I hope I will not goof with the technology and manage the share screen and all these tricks properly. So I'm going to now start sharing a PowerPoint presentation, but I will mostly do storytelling. Okay, I suppose you see my screen. I see Jessica nodding, so it's probably okay.
It's great,
so,
thank you.
It's great, okay. So I would first, hold on. Yeah, I will start by just telling a story, and the story involves a church, and I chose that story because that's how my quest started. When I came to Santa Fe, I saw that Santa Fe Cathedral, French church, French-looking church. I thought it was totally out of place. I wondered what it was all about. I learned about Archbishop Lamy, the first bishop, and French. I heard that the first 5 bishops were French, that 90% of the priests, Catholic priests, were French by the 1890s. So that's how I decided to look into the matter. So that first story I'll share, and it will be a kind of unstructured presentation. So this is a murder story. You recognize, of course, that's probably the Indian market or the Spanish market. And the murder scene is 1879. You see at the end of the arrow, it's just there behind at the corner of the street. And this is where Archbishop Lamy's nephew, he was not a priest, murdered the architect of the cathedral, François Mallet. So it's all about Frenchmen killing each other. And François Mallet was very, very likely, almost certainly, the lover of John Lamy, the nephew, his wife. So you see the scene. So this is the Exchange Hotel in Santa Fe, and the Exchange Hotel, it was on the site of now La Fonda. You see the round circle there, La Fonda, that's where the Exchange Hotel was. It was the best hotel in Santa Fe. And so that was it. That was the hotel. And it's a big story. It was a big story then because of who was involved. Of course, there was the Archbishop, one of the most prominent persons in town. Then there was John Lamy Jr., his nephew. Then there was Mercedes Chavez, who was the wife of the nephew, a probably very beautiful young woman. And she was from an extremely prominent family. She was the daughter of a governor, José Chavez. She was the granddaughter of another governor. And she was the niece of two governors, Mariano Chavez and General Armijo. So pretty good crowd. François Mallet was a young, kind of good-looking fellow who was French, but he was posted in California, and then Bishop Lamy called him to be the architect of the cathedral. And then on top of that, you have Thomas Catron, who does not play a direct role in the murder, although he kind of, and he was the lawyer for Mercedes Chavez. And of course, you know about the Santa Fe ring and all the life of Santa Fe in those days. So what happened? Well, the relationship between John Lamy Jr. and Mercedes was not going too well because she had been seen hand in hand with François Mallet, the architect. There were rumors that they had an affair together. So John was very upset about it. And he had threatened François Mallet to kill him if he kept seeing his wife. But it was pretty sour situation. And Mercedes had just filed for divorce from John with Thomas Catron as the lawyer. Okay, so that's the scene. Then the official story, and I will get into that later, is that John Lamy was walking out of the Exchange Hotel. François Mallet was walking out of the hotel after having dinner. And then John came behind him with a gun, shot him in the back of the head. So François Mallet dropped dead right dead. John crossed the street where there was this little camera store now. There is a camera store now, but it was the saloon of a guy called Dunant, Hans Dunant, who was a French Swiss. Anyway, the police came, John gave himself away and was arrested. Then there was a trial, and long story short, John was declared insane at the time of the murder, but only at the time of the murder. So he went to jail for a while, but not very long, because the famous doctor there, Dr. Longwill, historians know about him, said the jail in Santa Fe was just too unhealthy. So he was released from jail and he was free because it was just insane at the murder. So that's the short story. Now, what I wanted to raise is that there was a conspiracy of silence, which is still going on. I'm sure you heard about Sister Blandina, and she wrote her memoir. Well, she wrote her letters to her sisters were put into a book at the end of the Santa Fe Trail, and that was published in 1932. And it's a gossipy book. She tells about her memoirs of life in Santa Fe. And then there were other editions. You can see all the covers of these books here, many, many reeditions. You can buy one online. What's interesting is that if you read biographers' accounts, Louis Warner, who wrote a life of Bishop Lamy, he does not talk about it. Paul Horgan, in Lamy of Santa Fe, he has 3 very bland lines in the book where it was a major story. Now, if you read Sister Blandina's book, the 1932 edition, she talks for a couple of pages about the incident. And she tells you, well, the Mercedes was Lamy Jr., he was not coming out of a restaurant. He was coming out of the bedroom of Mercedes. And then she talks about Bishop Lamy, Archbishop Lamy being totally stressed, not eating, and so on. So that's all in that book. That book, you can read a copy. You cannot take it out, but you can read it at the State Archives. They have a copy, maybe we have one in the library here, whatever. So there is silence about this story. And this is a summary. On the left, you see Sister Blandina's story. So Malay is shot coming from Mercedes' room, while the usual story is shot after having dinner. Then after that, she drank poison, and that's a vial of poison which was supposed before to be used to poison her husband, according to Dr. Longwill. But she drinks poison, but she survives. Then Bishop Lamy locks himself at home. His door is locked. He doesn't want to see anybody. He does not sleep. He does not answer the door, and so on. And then Etienne Lacassagne, and still descendants around, he was a craftsman working on the cathedral. He warns Sister Blandina of the situation. That's why Sister Blandina writes all that in her memoirs. And she forces herself into the room of Archbishop Lamy, talks him into going to the hospital, goes to the hospital, he recovers, happy story. And so all that, the end of the story is that John and Mercedes lived another half century. Mercedes refused to pay the fees of the lawyer, Thomas Catron. He finally got $4,000 a few years later. And that was the end of the story. And they both rest, Mercedes and John, in this mausoleum here in the Rosario Cemetery. They're all together with the parents of Mercedes and so on. So I will want now to switch back to the beginning of the story. That was just to put you in the mood. But the French presence really started around 1539, when a priest from Nice, which is in France now, was the first, is thought to be the first European to set foot in New Mexico. I won't tell his whole story. I just tell a few things, and I'll tell you why. He was born in Nice. This is a picture of Nice in his days. You know, it has grown since then. And he was on an expedition to find the famed cities of gold, the cities of Cibola. Well, what he found was Zuni Pueblo. And so it was not so great, but it was still quite an adventure. And this is a painting of him briefing the important people in Mexico on his return. He was working for Mexico. And that led to the Coronado expedition. You can hear the story beautifully told by state historian Rob Martinez. He has his lectures, the Tertulia lectures. You probably can find them on the internet, and he tells you the story in really exciting terms. So that's it for that story. But he's thought to be the first European to set foot in New Mexico, in Zuni. So if we move ahead 150 years, I want to say a few words on of Jacques Grolet, Jean L'Archevêque. You probably heard about the name Gurule in New Mexico and the name Arquibeke. They are among the most famous names of New Mexico, and they descend directly from Jacques Grolet and Jean L'Archevêque, who came from France. And I'll tell you another murder story. I like murder stories. And I'll tell you how they came to New Mexico. These are the family crests, Gurule, Arquibeke. I won't talk much about the third guy, Pierre Meunier, because he doesn't seem to have had children, and he vanished from history after a few decades. So they came from La Rochelle in France. You see La Rochelle, this is an old painting. This is La Rochelle now, very similar. It has not changed very much. And that started in 1684. And the guy you see on top here is King Louis XIV. And he was mounting an expedition headed by Cavalier de La Salle, an expedition to claim Louisiana for the King of France. So they left from La Rochelle in July 1684 with 4 boats. They were not the same boat, they were different boats, but they were four ships. And they sailed across the Atlantic and so on. They stopped, cross around Cuba. The story is very well documented because many people kept diaries. And so this is one of the best documented stories of history, actually. Anyway, to make a long story short, they sailed and they arrived in Texas, in the Matagorda Bay, set up a fort, explored around. I cannot tell you the whole story, it's too long. And one boat came back to France, two others sank, and the Label, I'll talk more about the Label, that's the name of the ship, broke apart and sunk in the bay, in Matagorda Bay. No, anyway, so there was a whole team of hundreds of people, and they were in Texas, and then with complicated plot, a group of them murdered the head of the expedition, La Salle. And so the expedition started to get disbanded in some way, and several of the men, they were men in those days, moved to live with the Native Americans, the first people, and for quite a long time, for about 2 years. That's why here on this map, they are living there with them, being very appreciated because they had rifles and killed a few enemies of the tribes they were living with. And after some time, they got fed up with this thing, and the Spaniards were looking for them and for the French. So they decided to surrender to the Spaniards. And they wrote a letter. Grolet and Archibeke, Grolet and Archibeke, the ancestors, wrote that thing on a parchment. That was actually in display in Santa Fe a few years ago, the real thing. It still exists. And it's a parchment with a drawing of their ship. And on each side, you can see it's written, they write in French, basically, we have enough and we want to surrender. So, they went interrogated, sent prisoners, sent to Spain, sent to Mexico, then sent to Spain, put in jail in Spain, stayed about 2 years there. And then the relationships with France were get better between Spain and France. And so they were sent back to Mexico. They could not be sent back to France because they knew too much about the area here. So they went back to Mexico. And from Mexico, they joined the Velasco Farfan expedition to New Mexico. And that's how they came to New Mexico and settled there. And they had a very successful lives, and they founded these two dynasties. So what legacies? Well, Gurule, Santiago Gurule, that's how he became known. He died, of course. And his wife, Elena, after he died, acquired about 32,000 acres around Albuquerque. And actually, very much of what's now Albuquerque is built on her land. And so thanks to Santiago and Elena, Albuquerque is built almost on French land, if I can exaggerate. You can read a lot about this on this website, gurulefamily.org. And I say hello to Angela Lewis, who is listening to us. And she is the mastermind about the history of the Gurule family and the website. And I just go to this website, it's just amazing. Well, Juan L'archevêque became a successful man. He was an interpreter, a soldier, and he got killed during an expedition. And if you go to the museum when it reopens, there is the Segese hide. It's a big hide on animal skin. And this is one portion of a hide, and that describes his battle against a group of Frenchmen. That was about 800 miles from Santa Fe. You see all these guys are Frenchmen. They have French hats and French muskets. And it was a setup anyway. Almost everybody got killed, including Jean L'Archevêque and 37 French soldiers. this is the opportunity. He died almost exactly 300 years ago. So that's time to commemorate his life. In August was the anniversary. Now, you might wonder what happened to that boat which sank the label. And in the, I'm sorry, my screen is cut on the back, but hold on. Yeah, this photo was given to me by Jean Brusset. Is one of the leaders of the excavation in Matagorda Bay, where they managed to rescue the label. This is the archaeologist site. And in the mid-1990s, they recovered about 1.6 million artifacts, objects, and things. This is an amazing project. And this is in the museum in Austin. You see the hull of the label, which was cleaned and preserved. And this is a replica of a model of the label. So it's an extraordinary achievement to have dug that out of the sea. Now you probably heard, because you are history buffs, about the commemoration of the beginning of the opening of the Santa Fe Trail in 1821. And so everybody hails it because it's 1821 is the 200 years anniversary. And I want to stress that this was not the first time the Santa Fe Trail was traveled. It was the first time it was legally traveled by foreigners. So this is the Santa Fe Trail. I met some people who thought it was a bicycle trail again around Santa Fe, but it's not. It's the trail across the West from Independence, Missouri to Santa Fe. And the case I want to make is that before 1821, there were many French travelers on the trail. You see the display of the Chouteau Society, the French on the Santa Fe Trail. It's a display in Missouri. And he mentions a few of these French explorers. And on the left, you have from 1690 to 1817, so all before 1821, the French on the trail. One of the major pioneers was Pierre Vial. He was a man from Lyon in France, and he worked for the Spaniards. And he wrote a diary, so his travels are very well documented. He was an amazing guy. And you can see here the map of all these trips from 1786 to 1793. And you can see it connects Santa Fe to St. Louis, but also to Texas and so on. And this is a map. It's a copy, it's a 19th century copy of one of the maps, of the map he wrote in his diary. And you can see Santa Fe is mentioned here. And this is a very big book you can find, and it's a whole history of Pedro Vial. I think the book is about 500 pages long. Along the trail, because you'll notice this talk is very French biased. And on the trail, there was they used desiccated vegetables used by the army. Colonel Marcy, who wrote that in his manual, army manual. So they would import dried vegetables from Paris, and then they would smoke tobacco. And Pierre Lorillard was a Frenchman who came a long time ago. And this is an ad of his in 1789. And he was, tobacco and snuff of the best quality. And the Lorillard company still exists. They have sales of like $5 billion a year. And they sell all the cigarettes like Kent and all these brands, even if you have stopped smoking. So it's still around, and he was doing in those days a lot of chewing tobacco. Now, at the beginning, when I talk about Santa Fe Trail, you might have seen a slide. I said this trail starts and ends with the French. So it ends with the French in a way, because the travel on the trail stopped because of the railway. It was no longer needed. And here in Lamy, this is a picture of Lamy, an old picture, although it has not changed very much. That's where there is a rail station, the Galisteo Junction. And it was named, the city was named Lamy because Lamy was quite active. He donated some land. He had 16,000 acres land grants there. And he was supporting the project. So that gave the name Lamy to Lamy. So anniversary, the first legal travel on the Santa Fe Trail. But you know, you might wonder about my name, which sounds Italian. Well, it's a name from the island of Corsica. So I'm very pro-Corsican. And Napoleon Bonaparte was in Corsica. And the anniversary of his death is also 1821. But there is a whole chapter in my book about a painting of his. Not that he painted, it's probably this very painting you're seeing now, which was acquired by the Confederates when they retreated during the Civil War. And it might be the same painting which is now hanging in a French museum, the main Napoleon French museum, which the provenance is very doubtful. And there is a whole chapter of that in my book. So now I'm going to be a bit unstructured and just do a few. I'm not sure how I'm doing with time. And yeah, it's 5:30, okay. I will drop names and show you snippets from photo gallery, from my photo gallery, and mention a few things here and there. So the Santa Fe Trail, there were lots of French there because of St. Louis and the fur trade and the trade with Santa Fe and with Mexico. So you don't need to read that slide because this is not a course in French today, but you see all these names are French names that you see used very currently in diaries and accounts of the people on the time at the time. So this is an example, you know, au contraire, to the contrary, Frontière, which gave the name Frontière, Gage d'Amour, which was a high pouch where the trappers would carry their pipe, and so on and so forth. So, so that's speaking frankly on the Santa Fe Trail. And then I said I would do some name dropping. So here are a few drops of names. These are the best known French-speaking fur trappers and traders in New Mexico. So I pause a few seconds here. They are in alphabetical order. And I know we have in the audience some descendants of them. And you can see lots of them. Plus those who have less no trace in history, maybe they died young or something. So these are the French and French Canadians. Half of them were French Canadians. And 80% of the fur trade workers, in a way, were French or French Canadian. Okay, so that's it for French names on the Santa Fe Trail. Then I keep dropping names. They were very famous ones. The French first mayors in Santa Fe were the brother Roubidous, one after the other, Antoine and Louis. That doesn't mean they were the first mayors. Their title was first mayor. So they were the mayors, maybe the chief of the municipal council. I would hope there would be a picture of them in the city hall. And this is a carving of Antoine Roubidous. So it was later on the trail on rocks where travelers would carve their names. So lots of politicians. These are names of politicians in alphabetical orders. who were active in New Mexico, some more than others, but all had official elected officials. Then, sorry, technology. Then you had the very important people. You probably know about the Taos Revolt in 1847 after New Mexico was conquered by the Army of the West. And so there was this rebellion, and it was a carnage on both sides. And the so-called rebels were on trial. You could see they were defending their country, but they lost, so they were on trial, and there was this kind of drumhead court-martial, and many of them were hanged. And you can see that the judges, many of the judges and jurors were French: Charles Ben, Carlos Beaubien, Lucien Maxwell, Antoine Leroux. And you can see on the last lines, the jurors, many French names. It's a bit embarrassing sometimes. Anyway, another very famous man is François-Xavier Obery. We actually have an Obery in the audience, I think. And he had many nicknames: Skimmer of the Plains, Telegraph Obery, and so on. He had an outstanding reputation for a fair man, and he was in business. And he won the record of the fastest crossing between Independence, Missouri and Santa Fe in 5 days. People say he arrived glued to his saddle because of the blood from his buttocks. Don't know if it's true. And he died stupidly in a brawl in the Café of the Mercure Brothers on the Plaza. They were French Canadians doing business with Kit Carson and everybody else. And it was a brawl, a misunderstanding about the railway, and he died. And there were about 2,000 people at his funeral at the cathedral. They were tycoons: Lucien Bonaparte Maxwell. You can see they loved Napoleon in those days because his mother was French and his name was, his first name was Bonaparte. And he had the Maxwell grant of 1.7 million acres. Charles Beaubien, we mentioned him before, and Maria Petra. Sorry, it's about, I'm talking about their children now. There are 9 children, and Maria Petra married Jose Abreu, and she's on the cover on my book in that group of people. She's the lady sitting down. Ceran Sanvrin, very well known, and his great-granddaughter is extremely active, and they are refurbishing the mill in Mora. This is an older picture. The mill looks much better, and there is a whole foundation raising funds for, fixing the mill. Jesus Abreu and Petra Beaubien, that's the one I was mentioning. What's interesting in that family picture is that they're sitting next to each other, while in those days, usually the man sat and the woman was sitting down, this kind of stuff. Anyway, that's family picture. Another tycoon was Auguste Morin in Mesilla in the southern New Mexico. This is the first brick house built in New Mexico. And of course, the bricks were made by a French brick manufacturer, Jean Junest. And so this house is still standing. It's a little shop now. But Morin, Augustin, was murdered. He had gold buried on a kind of hole in the ground. So he was murdered and the gold was stolen. Actually, I tried to find the hole, but it's covered with a wood floor now. And then somebody else bought the house, paid another Frenchman, Pedro Duhalde, who was also murdered by robbers. It's bad news, this house. And then his nephew came to César Morin, who was inheriting the house, came, but he also died. We don't know what he died of, they say natural causes. So that's quite a story. And a mystery, I mentioned the painting of Napoleon before. Auguste Morin had a lot of very classical, beautiful paintings in that house, and nobody knows where they are. There are some indications, but they're gone. There's more details in my book about that. Now we had soldiers as adventurers. This is Joseph Girard, El Frances. And I got this picture from his great-grandson, Marley Acker. I don't know if he's among us today, but these were with the army invading Mexico as part of the invasion of Mexico in the late 1860s. And then he's one of the few, I traced 5 families actually, who ended up in New Mexico from the Mexico invasion by Napoleon III. There was François-Guillaume Couloudon, very prominent builder and architect who built many buildings, the Santa Fe Waterworks and things. And maybe his great-granddaughter is also with us today. There was Charles Blanchard, and I want to say a special word about it. He was a businessman, very, very prominent. He had stores in Las Vegas, in Socorro. He was involved in mining in the Magdalena Mountains, etc., etc. He also had the first telephone, I am told, in New Mexico. He had a telephone between his office and his warehouse in Las Vegas. But I got from his descendants a diary. It's more than a diary, it's almost a little book where he talks about the horrors that he was witnessing about the genocide of Native Americans. And at the end of his memoir, he says, I am writing all this for my descendants, for my children, so they know. So it's very poignant when you read that. Entrepreneurs, Alphonse Bourguet and his family, that's Socorro. There is a French quarter in Socorro. It's still on some maps, but there were fires, it burnt. But Socorro was very French. And my friend Nancy Cockshall, who is an author, pointed me and introduced me to all these families. It is fascinating. Thank you, Nancy, if you're here. And so that's a family picture. Another one also from the Socorro area is the Chambon and Compredon families. So big French group. And you see this little girl here, she lived over 100 years old. She did not know at the time, beautiful. Then the French, the growing grapes was big business, it still is, although there was a slowdown during Prohibition. And there's also a whole chapter in my book. And these are a few of the people involved in the wine business. Then there was the World Wars. And on the left, you have Colonel Charles de Bremont, who was he was one of the leaders in the New Mexico contingents in the war in France. He got gassed by the Germans, and when he came back, he died of the consequences of his being gassed. And if you go to the military museum in New Mexico, in Santa Fe, which is all renovated and has a whole role in education now. You'll see this picture and much more. It's very worthwhile to go to the museum, military museum. It was called the Bataan Museum. It's now the Military Museum of New Mexico. And this rail car, it's a whole story about this rail car. After the war, after World War II, the Americans sent a lot of stuff to France, milk, food supplies, and so on, because France was devastated. And then sometime later, the French sent a whole set, one rail car like this, to America full of gifts to say thank you. So that's so this car is in Albuquerque on the playground. You can see it. That's a picture of it. But what's interesting is that if you go to the library in Socorro, there is a glass display case where some of the gifts are displayed. And this is a photo, that's the Socorro Municipal Library. And you see these gifts, and they are labeled with letters written. And here is one letter. Geneviève Labutte, 1 year old, living this and that. Thank you for the good milk, sent to us. Well, she was 1 year old, or her parents wrote that when she was 1 year old. And I actually found her in France, and I have a picture of her drinking champagne and family pictures, which are in the book. So it's amazing after 70 years to find people who were involved in this. Now, I think we have 1 hour, so yeah, we're okay. So going to present times, after World War I, the French presence vanished. You know, there was World War I, total disruption. So now there are perhaps 1,000 French people in New Mexico. About 300 are registered in the French consulate, and only 62 came to vote for the presidential elections in the voting in Santa Fe. So there are not many, but there's still a few. But one really exciting project is to Mars with the French, because there is a project in Los Alamos called the Chemcam Project, and it's about devising, it's already done, devising this laser beam. So it goes on the rover on the planet Mars. You see that's Mars, looks a bit like New Mexico, but it's Mars. And the laser beams on the rocks, it gets vaporized and analyzed with some spectroscopic machine, I suppose. And so they can find out what the rocks are made of and if there is life. And half of the team is French. There were some French people in Alamos. I don't know if they're still left, but still there. But half of the team is in Toulouse in France, and half of the team is in Los Alamos. And the co-director is a Frenchman in Toulouse. So that's why I said to Mars with the French. And there are other businesses going on. So just a few words. The fun part of researching that book, I thought it would take 6 months to write, but it took 12 years. Not full time, of course. And I want to talk about surprises, discoveries, anecdotes, and rewards. So first surprise is that it was a huge topic. These are the covers of just one of the few biographies or books about individual French in New Mexico. So you can see Marcos de Niza, I mentioned it, Pedro Vial, the last Salle expeditions, that's Gouroulet, Arquebeke, and so on, Saint-Vrain, Bishop Lamy, Maxwell, Obery, Antoine Leroux, Alarit families, French trappers, and so on. So that was a surprise, how big the topic was. Then there was discoveries, amazing stories, like those of you who live in Santa Fe, you know the San Miguel Chapel, so-called the first oldest church in America. And it is in a place called the Barrio de Analco, which means on the other side of the river. And this barrio and this church exists because of a Frenchman, which you see on the right. He looks pretty impressive. And it's Théodore de Croix. He was the commander of what was called the interior provinces, and he was the nephew of the viceroy, who was also French. They were from Lille in France, but working for the Spaniards. And then the governor of New Mexico was Juan Bautista de Anza, and de Anza wanted to raise the barrio because it was not very clean, and he wanted to put an army barrack there. And And so he had these building codes. He wanted to destroy the chapel, the buildings. And so the residents of Analco in 1780, they went on foot or horses 5 weeks to plead to this guy. So they bypassed, they overrode, they bypassed this guy, which was quite something, you know, you bypass the governor to talk to his boss, quite a thing, to petition. And the Croix gave them satisfaction. So the church and the barrio were saved. Another amazing story is a submarine story, because we don't have many submarine stories in New Mexico. And this was one of the prototype submarines sent to Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War. And so there was a crew towing the submarine to bring it to America, and it got there. And one of the members of that crew bringing that machine was Henri Lambert. Henri Lambert, and I'll tell you a word about Henri Lambert and his son Fred. So he came with that submarine, and he ended up, I make the story short, he ended up in Cimarron, where he built the St. James Hotel. And it's one of the oldest hotels in America, a really museum place. And it's in Cimarron, and it still exists. And it has the reputation of being haunted because there were many murders of kind of famous people who would stop there, many murders. There are still bullet holes in the ceiling. So we go. And this is a photo, maybe, of the ghost of this woman, who is the wife of Henri Lambert. So a few years ago, it was this year where it was a horrible winter, it was a cold spell, most horrible winter in 50 years or something. And I was on my way back from watching wolves in Yellowstone. And so I stopped at the hotel and booked room 17, where the ghost is supposed to appear. And they say when the ghost appears, there is a lemony smell in the room. So I opened the window, and it was cold, I can tell you. And I started speaking French to attract the ghost. And actually, I smelled the lemony smell, the smell of the ghost. I was very excited, although I don't believe in ghosts, but I was excited. And I put my nose everywhere in the room. It turned out it was the lemon pledge of the wax on the furniture. So I did not see the ghost anyway. It was very disappointing. Anyway, there has been a recent book by Kevin McDavid, he might be among us tonight, and he wrote that book, History of the St. James Hotel in Cimarron. You can buy it on Amazon. What's amazing about this book is fully researched, and contrary to most books of this type, it does no invention, no stories, no creative inventions of what people might have done and things. It's really superbly documented. So if you want to know more about that, you read the book. And just on rewards of all this research is human connections, you know, meeting or connecting with descendants of the French in New Mexico, most of them in New Mexico, but quite a few in France, in Switzerland, and in Canada. And this is an example, already 7 years ago, it was the Ledoux family reunion near Las Vegas. And you can see there were about 80 or 90 people at the reunion, and you see I'm there on the right looking a bit younger. So these just a few insights, anecdotes, patchwork of French stories. I have about 1,000 French names of New Mexico in my book. I'm in touch with hundreds of descendants, and it's great fun. So I thank you so much. You can check my website, FrenchinNewMexico.com. It has much more. It has a whole outline of the book, and you can get in touch with me if you want to know more especially descendants. If you want to know my notes, my files and everything, it's absolutely open to everybody. So thank you again, Maria and Jessica and everybody. And I'm going to now try to stop the screen share if I know how to do it. So see you soon. How do I stop screen share? Oh, stop share. Okay, here I am. Sorry. Yes.
Thank you. And do you have time for some questions? We have a lot of them. Let's see. Can you hear me okay, François-Marie?
I hear you, yes.
Okay, I'm gonna start with the questions that are in our chat box. The first one is, in what year was the murder? And that is the question they asked about that first murder with the Archbishop.
I think it was on the slide. I think it's 1879, but one has to check.
Connie Romero asked, hello, François-Marie. In your book, you mentioned that, I'm gonna mispronounce this, Jean Le Archevêque. Is that right? I don't know.
Who?
If you could open the Q&A,
Yeah,
you'll know.
But there are so many things. I don't know which one you're really reading.
It's Archevêque.
Okay, thank you.
Is it on top?
Yeah, it's the very first one in the chat Q&A box.
Okay, because
Actually,
there seems to be hundreds. Okay, hold on.
So not the chat box, but the Q&A.
Oh, it's different?
Yeah. I'll go to
Q&A. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Connie. Yes. Jean l'Archevêque. Juan Archevêque. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
His parents
Oh,
were.
yeah. Well,
yeah.
yes, I have ideas, of course, because that story is fully documented. There are whole books on it. But if you go, Connie, to the website of Angela Lewis, gurulefamily.org, it's all there. It's all there. Yes, they were on the expedition. Yes. What is the, yeah. Right.
An anonymous attendee asked, I had a great grandmother from San Pedro, New Mexico, who was a gurul. She married a man with the last name Fraide, F-R-A-I-D-E. That was later changed to Friday. Is Fraide French as well?
Well, it's not common, but you know what happened a lot is names got misspelled. It could be just Fred, his first name, or, and you know, I think I recall on the family website of the Gurule, I think there are 14 different family lines, family trees. It's a huge thing. So, so the answer is I don't know.
Okay. Hector asks, do you know if most of the 40,000 French troops in Mexico stayed in Mexico and other parts of North America, or did they return to France after the end of the war in 1867?
Most of them returned to France on a whole fleet of boats, but a few had deserted. Although if you read books, they said deserted, but they did not all desert. They were discharged or they resigned. They were not deserters. So quite a few left, stayed behind. They had met women or they decided it was not bad to be in Mexico. Most of them stayed in Mexico. A few moved around. So you have quite a few in Texas and very few in New Mexico, but a few in New Mexico.
Thank you. Florence asks, is there a French version to the book?
No, because the book, that's the problem. The book is 450 pages long and everything I say in the book is documented. There are like 70 pages of endnotes. So translating it, you know, is so specialized. So the answer is no, or not at the moment.
Laura asks, are the brick homes in Santa Fe connected to the French?
Well, the one I showed is, but no, because bricks is not a French monopoly, but yeah, so no. No, I see my friend Victor Lacerva is asking about places. He says looks, he probably means Ledoux, but yes, on my website there is a tab with places, and there are quite many places, you know, Chapelle and Lamy, of course, and quite a few, yes.
Can you speak to the Pendaries area and Ledoux community about 30, 40 minutes to northwest
Yes.
of Las Vegas?
Yeah. Yeah, of course, I could not put everything in my talk because it would take a week, but Pandaris, and yeah, it's a prominent family. They participated in the building of the Las Vegas hotels, whatever it's called, the big old hotel there. A very prominent family with descendants. Oliver Lafarge is a descendant, and Pen Lafarge is also a descendant. And he wrote a wonderful book about Santa Fe. So I cannot talk easily about it. I would have to do some homework, but I mentioned him quite a bit in the book because it's one of the very prominent family from Gascony. Actually, a town is called Gascon in New Mexico from their place in France.
Okay. Elmer asks, when are you coming to UNM Zimmerman Library to talk about your book?
Well, I could come when it's open, if the virus goes away, and I could do a Zoom if they invite me. I did quite many talks in the past, and 2 or 3 in Albuquerque. If you go to my website, I don't know if I have about 20 talks in the past. Yeah, but I have nothing scheduled now.
Thank you. Marietta asks a good question. Who are the people on the cover of the book in front of the church?
Okay, it's the family of the older woman sitting is Petra Beaubien, the wife of Jim Abreu. I don't know if Jim Abreu is in the group. He could tell us, but because it is whole family. Is Jim here? No. Abreu, no, okay. That's Petra Beaubien and the Beaubien-Abreu family.
Okay. Would you say that New Mexico is second only in terms of the importance of French migration behind Louisiana?
No, it's not second only. It's much, much behind. It's actually very few in New Mexico. I would not attempt to write the French in Louisiana because it would be in the encyclopedia. Yes. Yeah, there are few. There are many more in Texas, for instance.
Sure. Elizabeth said she missed the first part of the webinar. Was there any history on Antoine Anaclet Ledoux? Does that sound right?
No, I did not mention because I couldn't mention everyone. I mentioned the Ledoux reunion at the end, you know, where the Ledoux family meets every July. I don't know if they met this year, but I have them in the book, yes. I don't know about Anaclet Ledoux. Actually, I don't know. For the next edition, I could find out, but I don't know.
Roberta asks, are the vineyards in New Mexico still owned by French families?
Yeah, quite a few. Yeah, Gruet, if you drink champagne, that's what I drink, the Gruet champagne in New Mexico. That the Gruet family, they came, I think, in the 1950s, not that long ago, but they have, I don't remember now offhand, but it's a whole bunch, yes. St. Clair wineries, some others, yes.
Thank you. Um, now I'm going to through the chat, trying to find questions that I may have missed.
I see only one now on my Q&A chat.
Yeah, some of them were asked in the chat, so I'm trying to
Okay.
see. If I missed your question, feel free to type it again. I feel like I did. Oh, I found some. Catherine, you have a couple questions. So what was the Taos Fair on Santa Fe Trail sign? Cotus Society?
Shuto Society,
Cotus
yes.
Society?
It's the Shuto Society. They're mostly focusing on the French in St. Louis, but it's also on the Santa Fe Trail. So they have these markers with there. If you Google Shuto Society, you find actually that picture and many others.
I'm going to ask some of the questions that were emailed before the presentation. Tom asks, are any culinary or wine influences from the French here in New Mexico?
Yeah, I've been asked that question, and it's not obvious. But I read that you remember the guy with an amazing clothes, Théodore de Croix, about the last story, the commander of the interior provinces, who was from Lille, and his uncle before was the viceroy, and Théodore, which became Teodoro. So he was controlling the governors. He was a very important guy. And he imported French wines from France. He had French cooks. He had French servants. The governor, I think in Texas, also had a whole French crew and a French wife. So there was some influence then. But now, I don't think there is much, unless you go to a French restaurant. Yeah.
Similarly, Victor asks, are there any French musical influences within New Mexico music?
I hope Rob Martinez, state historian, is on the show because he would know he's a musician. But there is nothing major, nothing major.
Okay. Let's see. Sorry, trying to find. Okay. This is from Mike. He says, thank you for conducting the webinar. Congratulations on this outstanding book. You mentioned that only 300 French citizens were registered with the French consulate in 2018, even though about 1,000 reside in New Mexico. Does that include people who are retired? And do you think the number of French citizens in New Mexico is changing?
Okay, I know these numbers because twice I was the president of the French voting booth or whatever, they had a thing in Albuquerque in the office of an honorary consul. And at the French election, only 62 came to vote for President Macron now, or the one before, whatever. And so the consul thinks, he knows how many people are registered in the consulate. If you're French or French American, like I am both, you can register at the consulate, but you don't have to. So those who register, there are about 300, 350, but many don't register. So the consul told me he thinks there are about 1,000, but we don't know. So they could be retired, they could be working, whoever they could be. You just need the citizenship and you can register. But I don't think it's growing.
Um,
especially with the virus, because many French people had restaurant owners, and quite a few have been closing.
yeah. Charlotte asks, since so many land grants covered the Four Corners, how did they revert to native tribes?
Yeah, it's complicated. I'm not a specialist in land grants, and there are still disputes about land grants. You know, there is a non-profit who keeps fighting because the Spaniard came, took the land from the first people, then the Anglo came, and through business dealings, we got land grants, and so it's a very complicated matter. It's still being litigated. So I think each one is kind of different. Some got sold, some people got ripped off basically with legal shenanigans and so on. You have to read a book on detailed land grant history, and it's very heavy going.
Um, do you know if the Branch family is from France? In your research, have you come across any Branch family information?
Branch?
Branch, Branch.
No, but
No.
that sounds like English or American.
Mhm.
Yeah, I've not come across them. By the way, on my website, there is a whole list of all the names. No
Yes.
biographies, but the whole names. That's how actually I could find many descendants, because when they Google their names, they find it and contacted me.
Yeah, a lot of these questions you'll find answers to more information at François-Marie Patorni. His website is FrenchinNewMexico.com. So be sure to check that out if I've missed any of your questions. Let's answer just a few more before we wrap it up. Did you talk about the Huguenots?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
By the way, I think the Gurule was a Huguenot, although the story is more complicated than that. But yeah, lots of Huguenots when they were kicked out by Louis XIV. They got out of France, yes.
Joseph asks, are the Alamans referenced in the book?
The what?
Alamans?
Alamans?
Let's see.
No.
Okay.
Jessica and François-Marie, I had one in my email that I'll just read to you while Jessica's looking through the other questions.
Thank you.
Eddie wanted to know any chance of finding out when the last time Juan Archibek saw and or talked with Santiago Gurule.
Can you say that again?
Sure. Any chance of finding out when the last time Juan Archibek saw and or talked with Santiago Gurule?
They probably are ways, because they were at each other's weddings, so they knew each other very well. I suspect Angela Lewis in the Gurule website might know.
Thank you. And then he wanted to know if there was any chance of getting a historical marker about the Via Sur expedition, similar to the one in Nebraska that shows Archibek's name.
Well, I don't know. I don't even know if there is one who would ask the former state historian, Robert Torres, I think leads this markers initiative. Robert Torres, contacting him, he would know or might be helping in making it happen.
Thank you.
All right. I'm going to ask 3 more quick questions before we wrap up, if that's okay with you. Elizabeth asks, what happened to the Pawnee son of Anaclet Ledoux? Did the Pawnee son, oh, it just ends there. What happened to the Pawnee son?
Of Ledoux?
Mhm.
I don't know, but if you send me an email, I can put you in touch with the Ledoux family. Some Ledoux are doing a lot of research. So I can give you their emails or connect you with them, and they would answer you or answer what they know. And if they don't know, it's probably almost impossible to know.
Marty asks, you didn't talk much about fur trappers. Any reason?
Any reason I did not talk about fur trappers is because you gave me 1 hour instead of 1 week. Yeah, that's why I just showed the names, because it's a whole, I have a series of books. It's 11 volumes of biographies of fur trappers, and a good half are French or something. So yeah, it's just because of time, and I could not cover everything.
Sure, thank you. For this last question, I see Marietta Gonzalez, you have your hand raised. I'll give you permission to talk if you'd like to ask your question. And you can unmute yourself.
Already answered my question. My question was one of who was in front of the church. And Francois, it is wonderful to see you. I'm the Taché Desmarais girl.
Yeah, thank you so much. I cannot see you. I just see your name on the screen. But
okay. Well, I'll be in touch with you sometime soon.
Okay, great.
Thank you for a super, super book. Merci beaucoup.
Il n'y a pas de quoi.
Thank you, Marietta. All right. Well, this was a wonderful, informative event. I thank you so much, François-Marie. You are an amazing researcher. There's no book like it. Be sure to check it out. We have copies at the Santa Fe Public Library, the French in Mexico. You can find all the information and links where to purchase it at Patorni's website, FrenchinNewMexico.com. And you can find out tons more information about the French in New Mexico, and anything you're curious about, if your family name, you'll find it there, and you'll find links to where to get in touch to answer any of your questions about French history. Thanks to Friends of the Santa Fe Library for sponsoring events like this. And be sure to check out Santa Fe Public Library's calendar for upcoming virtual events. Stay safe, read books. Everyone have a great evening, and thank you so much for providing this event. Really
Thank you so much, Jessica, and everybody. It was great fun. Be safe, and yeah, read books.
Read
Okay.
Thank you so much, François-Marie. I was just amazed to learn that there are still contents available for us to look at of the French, I forgot what they're called, the cars, the train cars.
Oh, the Merci train, yes.
Merci train, yes.
Yeah.
So interesting. I'm gonna go look at that.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting. Thank you. This was wonderful. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Good night.